Welcome to 5 Good Minutes.
You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Ecclesiastes with Kurt Bjorklund.
So Ecclesiastes 7 moves into this better statement, several better statements. And in a way, this is just some eclectic wisdom. It's written more like a poem, so it has the proverbial ideas. And it says at the beginning, the contrast between wisdom and folly. In the ESV for the heading, it just says wisdom in the NIV. And it says this: a good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth. And so a good name has throughout the Bible been a big deal, and yet he says the day of death is better than the day of birth. So a good name is being compared in some ways to the day of death. It's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. For death is the destiny of everyone, and the living should take it to heart. So now he's driving even harder into the points that he's made in chapter 6. He's saying it's way better to go to a funeral than a party. Because at a funeral, you're going to consider the idea that this life is fleeting. Then he says frustration is better than laughter because a sad face is good for the heart. It's better to live in frustration because you're living in reality than in laughter. Probably a way of not saying that laughter isn't a positive thing, but what he's driving at, I think, here is the idea of amusements and fun, and just saying it's better to understand and face your frustration than it is to live with constant amusements. In our day and age, maybe the way to think about this is it's better to go to a funeral and to sit and think about the frustration, futility, and brevity of life than it is to binge watch a Netflix show and amuse yourself and anesthetize yourself from that reality. And then he says this: the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of the fool is in the house of pleasure. So now he's driving this point home. It's better to heed the rebuke of a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. Like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This too is meaningless. So here he's wanting you and me to get the idea that our attempts to minimize deep thinking, hard thinking, frustrating questions, and basically using the pleasures of this life to make us not think about the deep, hard thoughts is actually counterproductive to a well-lived life. Because what you will do is, instead of asking the profound questions that thinking about death actually leads us to ask, then what we end up doing is we end up basically living our lives with this idea that we can consistently make our way forward by saying, I'm just going to enjoy. There's a book on Ecclesiastes called Living Life Backwards by an author named David Gibson. And he says this: once we grasp the big message of Ecclesiastes, that life in this world eludes our control, then how should we live? There are two options, he says. When we realize we cannot explain everything, that the people we love will become ill and die, we don't know why God would allow this to happen. Once we accept there's injustice and oppression, or that we have to face the fact that there's a throbbing hurt at the core of our soul that won't go away, one option is to try to flee reality and numb the pain and avoid the problems. Party as hard as we can, laugh as loud and as often as possible, drink ourselves into oblivion, live in the past or a land of make-believe instead of the present. That's the route of escapism. The other option, on the other hand, offered here in Ecclesiastes 7 is wisdom. Learn to live wisely in God's world in the midst of all the brokenness. But there's a big surprise with this alternative. The wisest thing you can do is to realize that not even being wise will tell you everything you want to know. In other words, understand that you are living a life that is short and doesn't bring all of the wisdom together that you're hoping for, even in this world. And that's in some ways what verses 7 and following start to talk about. Extortion turns a wise person into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Even a wise person can be bribed, basically. The end of the matter is better than the beginning, and patience is better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing, and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter, and money is a shelter, but the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves those who have it. So now what he's done is he said, I want you to see that in the midst of everything, wisdom is something worth seeking, but even wisdom has a limit.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.